Okay, so I have done quite a bit of tweaking of my search strategies, and I have found this result right here, the School-Based Flu Vaccination Program Report from the Columbia-Boone County Department of Public Health and Human Services. My final search, in case you were wondering, ended up being School-Based Influenza Vaccines Effectiveness. And you can see that's very different than my flu shots schools. I had to figure out that flu shots were a more slang term for influenza vaccine, and just instead of schools, I had school-based. So with this report here, the very first thing I need to know is what type of information it is, and I have identified it's a report. It is very helpful in that it says it's a report, and I need to figure out where that falls on the continuum of credibility. I need to know how skeptical I need to be. So going back to our lesson and looking at our continuum of credibility, we don't actually have reports anywhere. Instead, we need to know where it came from. And so it is from a county government health department, and that should fall more in the most government sites. We're going to want to still double check, but this report is a government report even though it's a local government report, and so this should fall on our highest level of credibility. Now remember, highest level of credibility doesn't automatically mean that every single result is perfect for you, and so that's what we're going to continue to look at with our evaluation. So the first thing we need to look at is currency. Again, this report is very useful in that it gives you the years right here on the front page, that it's covering the 2016 to 2017, I'm assuming school year, since it is a school-based vaccination report. And sometimes if you scroll down a little bit, you might see when it was actually published, like maybe it took them a little bit, and it was published in 2018. I am not seeing that here. Okay, on the very back it says it was prepared April 2017, and it does have a person's name here. So 2017, that is fairly recent. Again, having things within the past 5 years is best for medical research. Depending on what it is, sometimes things don't change too much, but within the last 5 years is typically the best. Next, I need to know how current the sources are that are cited, and hopefully your resource will have sources. So I need to go back beyond all the appendixes, and I see a bunch of references. So remember, this was published in 2017, and looking at these references, I see 2015, 2015, 2015, 2015, 2015. So 2015, here's a 2006, a 2011. So these are fairly recent for what they were looking at and within that time period. It's not a bad thing if they do have a much older reference in here. Having a few older references is not bad, because there's sometimes very influential research that is still being cited. But you do want to make sure they have some newer research as well. Next, I need to ask if the links are functional and if the website is being maintained. This one, it's not as important because it is a self-contained PDF file, and everything in here should just be here. If you're on a website, especially if you don't know the date it was published, you're going to want to see, hey, is everything still being taken care of, or was this published a long time ago and no one has really paid any attention? So in this case, I don't really need to look at that. If I really wanted to, I could go up and go to this website, the como.gov, because that'll be our main domain. And I could poke around and see whether these links are working. It is a City of Columbia website. I'm going to assume that most of it is usually up to date. Alright, let's go back to our report. And then the final question I have on currency is if my topic does require current information or if older ones work. My topic is a medical topic, so I do want to find more recent information. However, this is not something that is drastically changing, so it is possible that I could find things within the last decade that would still be useful. So it's not like things with cutting edge cancer treatments where new things are happening all the time. The basic rule of thumb is that medical research should be, again, within the last 5 years, but it's okay in certain instances to have it slightly older. However, this one is still within that 5 years, so it's fine. All right, so it's pretty good on currency. So next I'm going to move on to relevance. And the first thing I need to ask is, who is the intended audience? When you're doing academic research, you typically don't want things that are geared toward children, for instance, and you want to be careful for things that are geared toward the general public to make sure that it has enough information that you're able to use it. This intended audience, it is general public in a way, in that I think it was created in order to justify or to report on this initiative. Many government entities need to do that because they're funded by taxes. But it is using a lot of higher level vocabulary. So here it's talking about, the difference between trivalent and quadrivalent strains of influenza. So this is not a very, very general report. So I would say that this is general public, yes, but also practitioners, other county government or other government officials, health officials, any of them could find this report to be useful. The next question is how in-depth it is. So looking at this PDF, it is 22 pages, which is a nice amount. Obviously, you don't want to use something where there's only 2 paragraphs because you're not really going to get much from that. It doesn't have to be 22 pages. It can be, just a couple, but 22 pages is pretty good. And it has different sections as well. So as we're looking through, there's an introduction section, and then background, the process, the results, more on results, discussion including limitations, and a conclusion. There's also references, and then they have an appendix where they provide documents or other information that they used, letters and things like that. So this is a nice amount of depth. I should be able to get a lot of good information from it. Next question with relevance is, does it relate to my topic? And this is very important. I don't want to use something that has nothing to do with my topic. And so my topic is if schools should have a flu vaccine or flu shot program. This is reporting on the exact thing I propose, or the exact thing I want to research, school-based flu vaccination program. So this is very relevant to my topic, and it should help me get some good information to understand the next steps in my research. And the final question in relevance is, have I looked at a variety of sources before determining this is one that I will use? And if you watched the first video with my cursory evaluation, the answer is yes. I have looked at a lot of things. I had to change my search several times. This is an important question because a lot of people will search something and something looks sort of good in the first result. They click and they're like, great, I'm done. We want to make sure that A, we're not in a filter bubble, and B, that we've really looked out there and made sure that we're using the best search terms and the results that we get are really the best ones for what we're looking for, not just the most convenient. So overall with relevance, this is a good result. The next thing that I need to look at is authority, and authority is very important. Who is publishing this? So again, this is very easy. It is telling us it is from the Columbia-Boone County Department of Public Health and Human Services. And so that is pretty easy to determine that it is a local government source. And because it's a Department of Public Health and Human Services, this is what they specialize in. They specialize in health-related topics. when it asks about the author credentials, obviously we could just look at this Columbia Boone County Department of Public Health and Human Services, but earlier I noticed that the very last page, the back cover, it was prepared by Trina T. Cutter, who is a registered nurse and has a bachelor's of science in nursing. So it was prepared by a nurse, someone who should be familiar with different health topics, different health research, and how to effectively put that together. And then the final question I want to ask is if the URL reveals anything about the author or source. As we determined a little bit earlier with that como.gov, it does take us to the city of Columbia, Missouri. So it is hosted on their website. Now, this is fairly easy to determine who's in charge, but one thing that you typically want to do with authority is you want to do a lateral search. You want to search and make sure that this is a real place. Columbia Boone County Department of Public Health and Human Services. Is it real? What are their goals? So I'm going to put that in Google. And they actually are here. They are on, again, that como.gov. We can see that it is on that .gov site, and .gov is a restricted domain, so not anyone can just create it. They talk about how they are a nationally accredited public health department in the state of Missouri, with a link to that website that will let you see that yes, it is the Public Health Accreditation Board, and make sure that they really are accredited. You want to be very skeptical. Lots of people can say, hey, we're an advocacy group and we research this. We want to make sure that they really are who they say they are. So overall, I conclude that this report has good authority. Next, we want to move on to accuracy. And accuracy can sometimes be hard to look at, especially if you don't know too much about the topic that you are researching. So the first thing that you can do is look at, where does the information come from? I like this example because it's pretty easy to see that it was gathered and developed by this Department of Public Health, specifically under the auspices of a registered nurse. The information is coming from different references as well. They do list their references, and the references that they list are fairly good ones. Things from like the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, several from them, some actual journal articles. This one's from a Human Vaccines Journal, Clinical Infectious Diseases Journal, the Journal of School Nursing, PLOS One Vaccine. These are all good journals. And the next question is, does it make sense? And part of does it make sense is it not trying to inflame your responses? So this article, or this report, as we look through it, it does make sense. You know, what they did, and I know you're not going to really be able to read this through this quick little video, but what they did was they administered flu shots in schools, and they show you the total number of vaccinations that they were able to administer, and as well as see how what percentage of students were vaccinated. And then they were able to look at the flu season and if people were getting sick and if it was a benefit. So overall, it does make sense. They're not making any wild claims. They're not saying that it completely eliminated the flu. Nobody ever got the flu. They're not saying that it had crazy side effects that we've never heard of before. They're just saying, hey, you know, we gave these flu vaccines and we had a positive result. So next we want to look at if it's supported by evidence, and they do have data from their program. It's not the most in-depth data ever. It's pretty basic, but it's not necessarily looking for anything earth-shaking. They also have information, again, from their references, where they're kind of pulling that from. And these references, as I talked about, is pretty good at, or it's pretty good with their authority and where they're coming from. Now, the next question is if it's been reviewed or refereed. This one doesn't specifically say it has been peer-reviewed, and because it's a report, it's probably not specifically peer-reviewed. Peer review is more of like a blind review by other experts. I'm going to say that it was probably reviewed by other people. I can't imagine a government agency telling this person here, Trina, hey, write this, publish it, okay, and without looking at it. I am going to assume that they probably had people proofreading it, double checking, but we don't know 100% for sure. So in this case, the answer is probably. It was probably reviewed. There was probably some quality assurance process before it was published. The next question is if I can verify any of the information in another source or from personal knowledge. And I was able to see several other reports in my searching, so I could look there, see if their results are similar. From personal knowledge, it makes sense that the flu shot can help reduce instances of the flu, and if children are getting them, regardless of where they're getting them, there's probably going to be less cases of flu. So I could verify that with personal knowledge. It is more important, though, to verify it in an external source. So I'd probably go back to my search results and look through some of these other results that I got, like effectiveness of school-based influenza vaccination, and make sure those kind of line up. So overall, it's pretty good accuracy. Oh, right, there's spelling, grammar, or typographical errors. I didn't see any of those as I kind of skimmed through. One or two is not a big deal, but if you see a ton of errors, that's when you want to kind of get a red flag up and think if they didn't pay enough attention to make sure that it was properly written, how can we trust that their numbers are right or their information is correct? So, okay, so accuracy, pretty good. Now, the last one is where some students struggle, and that's looking at perspective and purpose. And sometimes this is called bias, but bias sounds like it's always a bad thing. And there's a lot of people who have personal biases towards certain things, where it's not necessarily... it's not a malicious bias. So we always want to evaluate why this was written. Are they trying to inform you about something? Are they trying to teach you about something? Do they want to entertain, or do they want to persuade you? You really need to be careful with the persuasion, especially if it's something where you read the information and you get angry. We've all heard about clickbait. Anything where they're really trying to inflame or make you have strong emotions, you need to step back and think even more critically. Where is this information from? Is it from other credible sources? Why are they publishing this? Is it just to get clicks and to get more views so that their ad count goes up and they get paid? Is it to convince people to vote a certain way? Is it to convince people to not do something? You always really need to look at that. So this first question, the purpose of the information. This seems to be more informative. They did something. They used tax money to do it because their budget is tax funded. And so they released a report to say, how did it go? If you look at the conclusions, they do talk about how they think it is an efficient way to immunize large number of students, and they think that it is useful and has benefits for students. They want to continue the program. But they're really not making any other crazy claims beyond that. They're not saying that every school must do this, or every student must get a flu shot. They're not fear-mongering, saying if schools don't have this, you're going to see an increase in student deaths or something like that. So it's very neutral. And it seems to be more of just reporting and to inform the readers of what happened. And that's a good thing. We want neutral and we want informative. Our next question is if authors or sponsors make their intentions or purpose clear. Again, I think this is fairly clearly a report on what happened. Sometimes you want to look and see if a website is sponsored by a particular group or program and what their missions are to help determine whether there might be a hidden bias. Next is the information to fact, opinion, or propaganda. You always want to be very careful with opinion and propaganda, and you want to make sure that facts are actually facts and not people saying something and not backing it up or saying things like they were facts and they're not actually, as many people have heard fake news. That's one of those. And so this is based on everything that we've seen here, fairly clearly facts, and it is backed up by the information within the report. The next question is if the point of view appears objective and impartial, and it does. As I was looking through, again, we're not seeing any crazy claims. We're not seeing any fear-mongering. We're not seeing even caution. It is just the facts, ma'am. Next, is there a commercial or organizational interest associated with the site? And we've determined that this is a Department of Public Health. So their interest is probably just to keep people healthy, but they're not making money out of this. Very rarely do government agencies, especially local government agencies, make a profit. It's more that they're serving their constituents. But again, if you find a site where they're talking about, and there's an example of this in the lesson about how apple cider vinegar will cure cancer and it's amazing for you. And hey, look at that, they're selling apple cider vinegar. Yeah, that's probably not really a balanced viewpoint. They want to make money. And so, as I said earlier, our last question is about whether it's designed to provoke strong emotions. And I have really seen an increase in this in the last 5 years. News articles, clickbait, BuzzFeed, things on Facebook. It seems like nothing can just be a basic headline anymore. It has to be provoking you to click it one way or the other. Anytime you are reading something and you find yourself just getting really angry or really upset, or if you are thinking, yeah, that's right, step back. See what you can find in other places, and especially make sure that you are looking at more neutral places. A lot of times, and this happens on both sides of the political spectrum, there is a small group that kind of cites each other, and it's kind of just a circle and it's all on one side. So, a right-wing site might cite another right-wing site, which is citing another one, and they're all just kind of going around in circles. And it happens on the left as well. So it's not a one side of the political spectrum. But you want to make sure that you've got some things in here that you can be clear with authority are looking at the whole picture, and they're not trying to just provoke you into believing something. Okay, so overall, I determined that the perspective is, and the purpose is to inform, and it's coming from a place of just reporting. So overall, this is a pretty good result. It's a pretty good piece of information that can help me out with my research.